Hey guys, it's Miss Navert again. We are going to continue going over our read aloud of Holes, and today we're going to read chapters 12 through 14, okay? But first, let's go over those questions that you answered from Monday to make sure that you understand the story, okay? So the first question I asked is, what can you infer or predict? So you have to make a prediction of what you thought might have happened and why you think the yellow-spotted lizards are in this story. So you could have made a prediction of, I think Stanley might find one in a hole in the near future. Someone's going to get bitten by one in the story. You just kind of had to make a prediction of why you think they are giving us so much detail about these yellow-spotted lizards and predict what role they might have in the story, okay? Number two, my question was, what is a flashback? Holes by Sachar has a lot of flashbacks back and forth, and it can be really hard to understand if no one explains to you exactly what a flashback is. A flashback is a moment when our present story kind of pauses, and then it goes back in the past to kind of give us more detail about the story that we're reading about. So each time they go back and they explain about Stanley's great-grandfather or stories that have happened in the past, it's giving us more details so we can understand the story we're reading about Stanley right now in the present. So that's a flashback, is when it goes back in time and kind of gives us a background story or a side story that gives us more information about the actual story we're reading. Number three, the next question I asked you was, who is Caveman? Caveman is Stanley. So it's the nickname that X-Ray, Squid, Magnet, Armpit, they all gave Caveman the nickname Caveman to Stanley. So now he's kind of like a part of the gang. He's starting to make friends and he's starting to kind of fit in, and getting the nickname Caveman has really helped him join the group. Number four, what object did Stanley find on the lake and did it give him the day off? So Stanley found a rock that had a fossilized fish in it, so you could see all the bones and stuff, and Stanley went to go turn it into Mr. Pandansky, but then Mr. Pandansky says the warden doesn't care about fossils, so then he did not receive the rest of the day off, which was Stanley's disagreement and disappointment, but he'll be okay. Number five, what does Stanley dream about at the end of the last chapter that we read? So the last thing we read about was his kind of posse from Group D, his group of friends, Squid, Armpit, Zero, and X-Ray and all those kids. So there was this kid in his old school before he got arrested named Derek Dunny, and Derek Dunny always picked on Stanley, so he fantasized and daydreamed about, the guys from Group D kind of beating up on Derek Dunny to kind of get a little bit revenge on him. So that was the last thing that we read, that Stanley was kind of starting to be a part of this group and kind of getting a groove at Camp Green Lake. So now we're going to read chapters 12 through 14 and see what we learn even more about Stanley. Okay? All right, here we go. Chapter 12 of Holes by Sachar. I miss you guys. I wish I was reading this to you in person. It'd be way more fun. It's kind of crazy reading to a computer screen. All right, chapter 12. Again, Stanley was the last one to finish digging. It was late afternoon when he dragged himself back to the compound. This time, he would have accepted a ride on the truck, if it were offered. When he got back to the tent, he found Mr. Pandansky and the other boys sitting in a circle on the ground. "Welcome, Stanley," said Mr. Pandansky. "Hey, Caveman, you get your hole dug?" asked Magnet. He managed to nod. "You spit in it?" asked Squid. He nodded again. "You're right," he said to X-Ray. "The second hole is the hardest." X-Ray shook his head. "The third hole's the hardest," he said. "Come join our circle," said Mr. Pandansky. Stanley plopped down between Squid and Magnet. He needed to rest up before taking a shower. "We've been discussing what we want to do with our lives," said Mr. Pandansky. "We're not going to be at Camp Green Lake forever. We need to prepare ourselves for the day we leave here and join the rest of society." "Hey, that's great, Mom," said Magnet. "They're going to finally let you out of here." The other boys laughed. Okay, Jose, asked Mr. Pendanski, what do you want to do with your life? I don't know, said Magnet. You need to think about it, said Mr. Pendanski. It's important to have goals. Otherwise, you're going to end up right back in jail. What do you think? What do you like to do? I don't know, said Magnet. You must like something, said Mr. Pendanski. I like animals, said Magnet. Good, said Mr. Pendanski. Does anyone know of a job that involves animals? Veterinarian, said Armpit. That's right, said Mr. Pendanski. He could work in a zoo, said Zigzag. He belongs in a zoo, said Squid. Then him and X-Ray laughed. How about you, Stanley? Any idea for Jose? Stanley sighed. Animal trainer, he said. Like for the circus or movies or something like that. Any of those jobs sound good to you, Jose? Asked Mr. Pendanski. Yeah, I like what Caveman said about training animals for movies. I think it would be fun to train monkeys. X-Ray laughed. Don't laugh, Rex, said Mr. Pendanski. We don't laugh at people's dreams. Someone is going to have to train monkeys for the movies. Who are you kidding, Mom? Asked X-Ray. Magnet's never going to be a monkey trainer. You don't know that, said Mr. Pendanski. I'm not saying it's not going to be easy. Nothing in life is easy. But that's no reason to give up. You'll be surprised what you can accomplish if you set your mind to it. After all, you only have one life, so you should try to make the most of it. Stanley tried to figure out what he would say if Mr. Pendanski asked him what he wanted to do with his life. He used to think he wanted to work for the FBI, but this didn't seem the appropriate place to mention that. So far, you've all done a pretty good job at messing up your lives, said Mr. Pendanski. I know you think you're cool. He looked at Stanley. So you're cavemen now, huh? You like digging holes, caveman? Stanley didn't know what to say. Well, let me tell you something, caveman. You are here on account of one person. If it wasn't for that person, you wouldn't be digging holes here in the hot sun. You know who that person is? My no-good, dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-great-grandfather. The other boys howled with laughter. Even Zero smiled. It was the first time Stanley had ever seen Zero smile. He usually had such an angry expression on his face. Now he had such a huge smile it almost seemed too big for his face, like a smile on a jack-o'-lantern. No, said Mr. Pendanski, that person is you, Stanley. You're the reason you're here. You're responsible for yourself. You messed up your life, and it is up to you to fix it. No one else is going to do that for you. For any of you. Mr. Pendanski looked from one boy to another. You're all special in your own way, he said. You've all got something to offer. You have to think about what you want to do. Then do it. Even you, Zero. You're not completely worthless. The smile was now gone from Zero's face. What do you want to do with your life? Said Mr. Pendanski. Zero's mouth was shut tight. As he glared at Mr. Pendanski, his eyes seemed to expand. What about it, Zero? Asked Mr. Pendanski. What would you like to do? I like digging holes. Chapter 13. All too soon, Stanley was back on the lake, sticking his shovel in the dirt. X-Ray was right. The third hole was the hardest. So was the fourth hole, and the fifth hole, and the sixth, and the... He dug his shovel into the dirt. After a while, he'd lost track of the days of the week and how many holes he'd dug. It all seemed like one big hole, and it would take 1.5 years to dig it. He guessed he'd lost about 5 pounds. He figured that in 1.5 years, he'd either be in great physical condition or dead. He dug his shovel into the dirt. It couldn't always be this hot, he thought. Surely it got cooler in December. Maybe then they froze. He dug his shovel into the dirt. His skin had gotten tougher. It didn't hurt so much to hold the shovel. As he drank from the canteen, he looked up at the sky. A cloud had appeared earlier that day. It was the first cloud he could remember seeing since coming to Camp Green Lake. He and the other boys had been watching it all day, hoping it would move in front of the sun. Occasionally it got close, but it was just teasing them. His hole was waist deep. He dug his shovel into the dirt. As he dumped it out, he thought he saw something glisten as it fell into the dirt pile. Whatever it was quickly buried. Stanley stared at the pile a moment, unsure if he'd even seen it. Even if it was something, what good would it do him? He'd promised to give anything he found to X-Ray. It didn't seem worth the effort to climb out of the hole to check it out. He glanced up at the cloud, which was close enough to the sun that he had to squint to look at it. He dug his shovel back into the earth, scooped some dirt out, and lifted it over his dirt pile. But instead of dumping it there, he tossed it off to the side. His curiosity had gotten the better of him. He climbed up out of his hole and sifted his fingers through the pile. He felt something hard and metallic. He pulled it out. It was a gold tube, about as long and as wide as the second finger in his right hand. The tube was opened at one end and closed on the other. He used a few drops of his precious water to clean it. There seems to be some kind of design on the front. Closed end. There seemed to be some kind of design on the flat, closed end. He poured a few more drops of water on it and rubbed it on the inside of his pants pocket. He looked again at the design engraved in the flat bottom of the tube. He could see an outline of a heart with letters KB etched inside of it. So like that. He tried to figure out He tried to figure out some way that he wouldn't have to give it to X-Ray. He could just keep it. But that wouldn't do him any good. He wanted a day off. He looked at the large pile of dirt near X-Ray, where X-Ray was digging. X-Ray was probably almost finished for the day. Getting the rest of the day off would hardly do him any good. X-Ray would first have to show the tube to Mr. Sir or Mr. Pendanski, who then would have to show it to the warden. By then, X-Ray might be done anyway. Stanley wondered about trying to secretly take the tube directly to the warden. He could explain the situation to the warden, and the warden might make up an excuse for giving him the day off, so X-Ray wouldn't suspect. He looked across the lake towards the cabin under the 2 oak trees. The place scared him. He'd been at Camp Green Lake almost 2 weeks, and he still hadn't seen the warden. That was all just as well. If he could go the entire year and a half without seeing the warden, that would be just fine with him. Besides, he didn't know if the warden would find the tube interesting. He looked at it again. It looked familiar. He thought he'd seen something like it somewhere before, but couldn't quite place it. "What you got there, caveman?" asked Zigzag. Stanley's large hand closed around the tube. "Nothing, just, It was useless. "I think I might have found something." "Another fossil?" "No, I'm not sure what it is." "Let me see," said Zigzag. Instead of showing it to Zigzag, Stanley brought it to X-Ray. Zigzag followed. X-Ray looked at the tube, then rubbed his dirty glasses on his dirty shirt and looked at the tube again. One by one, the other boys dropped their shovels and came to look. "It looks like an old gunshot shell," said Squid. "Yeah, that's probably what it is," said Stanley. He decided not to mention the engraved design. Maybe nobody would notice it. He doubted X-Ray could see it. "No, it's not. It's too long and thin to be a gunshot shell," said Magnet. "It's probably just a piece of junk," said Stanley. "Well, I'll show it to Mom," said X-Ray. "See what he thinks. Who knows? Maybe I'll get the day off." "Your hole's almost finished," said Stanley. "Yeah, so?" Stanley raised and lowered his shoulder. So why don't you wait till tomorrow to show it to Mom? He suggested. You can pretend you found it first thing in the morning. Then you can get the whole day off instead of just an hour or so this afternoon. X-Ray smiled. Good thinking, caveman. He dropped the tube in his large pocket on the right leg of his dirty orange pants. Stanley returned to his hole. When the water truck came, Stanley started to take his place at the end of the line. But X-Ray told him to get behind Magnet, in front of Zero. Stanley moved up one place in line. Chapter 14. That night, as Stanley lay on his scratchy and smelly cot, he tried to figure out what he could have done differently. But there was nothing he could do. For once in his unlucky life, he was in the right place at the wrong time, and it still didn't help him. You got it? He asked X-Ray the next morning at breakfast. X-Ray looked at him with half-opened eyes behind his dirty glasses. I don't know what you're talking about, he grumbled. You know, said Stanley. No, I don't know, X-Ray snapped. Just leave me alone, okay? I don't want to talk to you. Stanley didn't say another word. Mr. Sir marched the boys out to the lake, chewing sunflower seeds along the way and spitting out the shells. He scraped the ground with his boot heel to mark where each boy was supposed to dig. Stanley stamped down on the back of the blade of the shovel, piercing the hard, dry earth. He couldn't figure out why X-Ray had snapped at him. If he wasn't going to produce the tube, why did he make Stanley give it to him? Was he just going to keep it? The tube was gold in color, but Stanley didn't think it was real gold. The water truck came a little after sunrise. Stanley finished his last drop of water and stepped out of his hole. At this time of day, Stanley sometimes could see some distant hills or mountains on the other side of the lake. They were only visible for a short while and would disappear behind the haze of heat and dirt. The truck stopped, and the dust cloud drifted past it. X-Ray took his place in the front of the line. Mr. Pendanski filled his canteen. Thanks, Mom, X-Ray said. He didn't mention the tube. Mr. Pendanski filled all the canteens and then climbed back into the cab of the pickup truck. He still had to bring water to Group E. Stanley could see them digging about 200 yards away. Mr. Pendanski! X-Ray shouted from his hole. Wait, Mr. Pendanski, I think I might have found something. The boys all followed Mr. Pendanski as he walked over to X-Ray's hole. Stanley could see the gold tube sticking out of some dirt on the end of X-Ray's shovel. Mr. Pendanski examined it, took a long look at its flat bottom. I think the warden is going to like this. Does X-Ray get the day off? Asked Squid. Just keep digging until someone says otherwise, Mr. Pendanski said. Then he smiled. But if I were you, Rex, I wouldn't dig too hard. Stanley watched the cloud of dust move across the lake to the cabin beneath the trees. The boys in Group E were just going to have to wait. It didn't take long for the pickup to return. Mr. Pendanski stepped out of the cab. A tall woman with red hair stepped out of the passenger side. She looked even taller than she was, since Stanley was down in his hole. She wore a black cowboy hat and black cowboy boots, which were studded with turquoise stones. The sleeves of her shirt were rolled up and her arms were covered with freckles, as was her face. She walked right up to X-Ray. This where you found it? Yes, ma'am. Your good work will be rewarded. She turned to Mr. Pendanski. Drive X-Ray back to camp. Let him take a double shower and give him some clean clothes. But first, I want you to fill everyone's canteen. I just filled them a little while ago, said Mr. Pendanski. The warden stared at him hard. Excuse me, she said. Her voice was soft. I had just filled them when Rex... Excuse me, the warden said again. Did I ask when you last filled them? No, but it's just, excuse me? Mr. Pendanski stopped talking. The warden wiggled her finger for him to come to her. "It's hot, and it's only going to get hotter," she said. "Now these fine boys have been working hard. Don't you think it might be possible that they might have taken a drink since you last filled their canteens?" Mr. Pendanski said nothing. The warden turned to Stanley. "Caveman, will you come here, please?" Stanley was surprised she knew his name. He'd never even seen her until she stepped out of that truck. He didn't even know the warden was a woman. He nervously went towards her. "Mr. Pendanski and I are having a little bit of a discussion. Have you taken a drink since Mr. Pendanski last filled your canteen?" Stanley didn't want to cause any trouble for Mr. Pendanski. "I still got plenty left," he said. "Excuse me." He stopped. "Yeah, I drank some." "Thank you. May I see your canteen, please?" Stanley handed it to her. Her fingernails were painted dark red. She gently shook the canteen, letting the water swish inside the plastic container. "You hear the empty space?" she asked. "Yes," said Mr. Pendanski. "Then fill it," she said. "And the next time I tell you to do something, I expect you to do it without questioning my authority. If it's too much of a trouble for you to fill a canteen, I'll give you a shovel. You can dig the hole, and Caveman can fill your canteen." She turned back to Stanley. "I don't think that would be too much trouble for you, would it?" "No," said Stanley. "So what'll it be?" she asked Mr. Pendanski. "Do you want to fill canteens, or do you want to dig?" "I'll fill the canteens," said Mr. Pendanski. "Thank you." All right, so we're going to be ready for chapter 15. Ooh, the story's starting to get good. Okay, so now you need to go back into your email, answer those questions that are in pink, and respond back to me so I know that you listened to this section. So again, today was chapters 12 through 14, and we're getting ready for 15, okay? All right.